Hello. Teaching is raising awareness. I believe that very much. Not only so, but guiding the different levels of intuitive knowledge that students come with, either because of their hearing, either because of their analytical capacity, either whatever made them able to connect with the music making in a way that they feel like a fish in the water. It's hard for a fish to be allergic to water, to be a fish. And therefore, sometimes the awareness in the studies brings them to become more nervous about failing naturally, but also to understand why they make the things that they do and what the real meaning of fun is. Not just, of course, entertainment fun, but the self-accomplishment, the sense of jubilant connection with the music. And of course, the drawback is the repetitive practicing, which is at an early age imposed at a middle young age when you become student in a university or conservatory, becomes a repetitive obligation. And some people are able to fast absorb the mnemotechnic knowledge of this kind of automatization of the awareness of playing that you can do without to think, but then when you're aware, it's hard. And the texture of the pieces for piano that are composed are usually polyphonic, symphonic, string quartetish, more or less operatic, at least more than a two-voice invention, and even so, to follow the two voices through is one hand each. But when you have three or four, then you have to share voices between hands. You have to imagine them conceptually, so either by hearing them innerly before you play them so that you can not betray your musicianship in the performance, and then add to that the nervousness of being able to deliver the whatever you prepared the day you have to play it, or the evening it has to be, whenever, in front of professionals or in front of an audience of anybody. Regardless, it's a level of confidence and sense of necessity to translate in all earnest way what the music means to you through the technique that you learn. But to teach is to raise awareness. And that awareness sometimes takes a full circle to go back to the original intuition of the child, if it was when music was started by having parents oblige you to take lessons, or perhaps detecting your musical inclination that were not very clear, obviously never saw enough when you were a child, but then you acquire technically at an early age the capacity to develop what later with the intellectual growth you can play on of already acquired grounds of technique. But the awareness in question in that studying through the teacher revealing the score, just like watching a painting in a museum and having next to you an art specialist explain to you the painting, and then all of a sudden you see in it things you didn't see except for what emotionally or aesthetically you found beautiful to be, and it is. While by understanding more, you might have to go back to that initial marvelment in front of it that was out of nothing, because you don't have to always compare to know. When you're in love, you don't say, but you do, oh, you're the most beautiful person in the world, and that doesn't mean that statistically you've checked all the others, literally. Because it's in the eye of the beholder and the choice. It's like faith. You don't have to have seen the person that you worship to know to worship this person, if it's Christ for this or that, or Buddha and so on. I still think that is a little bit of the problem with music, is that you learn it because of an intuition that originally attracted you to it. But the complexity of the stylistic events, the details of the technical ways to approach it, and then to deliver all that is a package together once it's really, let's say, if not assimilated, at least filtered at different stages of your life, when you are aware of the complexities or unaware of the complexities. And so how to go back to that original marvelment after you've been exposed to the learning of the complexities. In other words, that is the problem of being a good grammatician after you learned it as a mother tongue by ear, and then being able to write a beautiful text of a storytelling that doesn't sound like a treatise in the text because you're such a good grammatician. Sometimes the vehicle is as important as the message itself. And the problem is the interpretation is that you are the vehicle of the message that is written by a dead composer, learned with a living teacher, 2, 3, 4, contradicting themselves or by themselves as well, because nothing is so set in the stone, obviously, because of the tempi, the articulation, the analysis of the knowledge of the time period of the instrument, the styles, the tastes, the comparative interpretations of famous or less famous pianists, if it is a piano piece, and so forth and so on. And then you get full circle, and that full circle should be the moment where only you as a student becoming the future performer, you blend the merging of all this information and you maintain that initial marvelment in front of the work of art. Would it be because your ear is your guide? Not only from the right and wrong note, but also from the right tone, from the tone you search for, or you don't know exactly which tone you search for in terms of color, atmosphere, timbre, imagination, evocation, voice sounding like, or instrumental sounding like, from another point of view than pianistic. That is very much the case when you teach. You give this kind of... I like to think that the teacher is almost like a cook who teaches a future cook. And so the transmission is not only in the knowledge of the ingredients and their levels, but also in the shaping of the taste buds. Because obviously if you're grown to like salty, then it's not sugary enough, and vice versa. And if you combine them, then it becomes bittersweet. And when you are expert in wine tasting or in food cooking, you can immediately discern the different levels of ingredients in the taste bud. Or if you build parfums, you can memorize certain amount of thousands of smells, and you can isolate which one is too much in this combination of your taste. But sometimes if you have a layered cake and you have a birthday and you make a slice and you offer to taste it with your friends, you combine the tastes and taste buds with the different layers, and you don't hear them only separate like when you prepared the cake and you put them together. And I find to be the case that legato, singing, articulation, all these elements with pedal, acoustics, resonance, voicing, hearing, colorizing, meaning the sentence of the phrase, not only the beauty of the sounds, but some kind of a storytelling, narrative quality to it that in fact psychologically manipulates the listener by the intensity of the speech, the way the musical agogic is going on in the rhetoric, and it's convincing because it's subphrased in shorter or in longer sentences. If it's a run-on sentence like the one I just used just to say all these concepts, or if you organize it in a more, let's say, a young adult way and not intuitively post-child way, which is, I want to eat all the ingredients because I'm very hungry and I want to enjoy all the tastes. No, I'm going to be organizing it in a treatise style when I'm going to learn how to organize a system, so that I apply a system in order to organize all the order of the ingredients. Because ultimately you have to display them in the performance, either chosen by the composer, either seasoned by your interpretation, which is in fact your education, or your cultivated understanding of the ingredients and their combination. how much pedal, how much bass, how much melody compared to this or that. In pop music is all electronically mixed according to a radio broadcast or different types of sound files that can be organized towards the treble or toward the basses or toward the middle sounds. And people speak of sound not only in terms of a combination of melodic or harmonic progressions, and in fact it is all the same language because we use the same alphabet. We just end up with a symphony or a pop song, a ballet or an opera, and video game music or a pop music used from a classical tune adapted for a 30 seconds commercial on TV. And all these are part of the way we use music in terms of the industry, in plural obviously. As well as when we learn from the old masters in the conservatory style, we conserve. So we conserve what? Tradition, knowledge, organization of thoughts, a way of learning the right from wrong, which is the good tempo, which is the right tempo, which is the interpretation that over-enhances the intensity or the incentive that the composer gives in the intention, either by the notation of the sign or the music itself or the indication of what it's supposed to mean. Translated from Italian or German, in most of cases French sometimes too. So you have to have a little bit of knowledge of the culture that is behind the notation of these universal signs of musical, in fact, culture. And I think this is part of our humanities. We're not supposed to become writers because we read and write and learn how to express ourselves without to become convincing politicians delivering a speech. Or then we can, if we become a speech writer, or if we can, we just write a treatise, and we, or perhaps we write a medical medicine notice how to take it and how to avoid other diseases. So we have to be so precise in our words choosing. It's exactly like the musician, exactly knowing at which point to deliver this note after this grace note, which follows this rubato, but not too much, and then brings out this sound in a way that you convince the listener that in the combination this is what you want to highlight, what you want to voice to follow, or another voice to take over, and how you mesmerize the listener by either your bedazzling technique of quick notes or perhaps of voicing in a way that the sound of the piano becomes in way a singing instrument when it's originally a percussive instrument with vibrating string and decaying sound. And if you combine them in a certain tempo, you can be in the denial of thinking that you really are singing, as if you have a air that exhales and then produces the sound, either the bow length of a string instrument that connects the sounds, or then the legato that you obtain by feeling almost the energy transmit through the knuckles and going from one to the next note. And you feel like this is the industry of playing itself takes its own, as mathematicians say often, the beauty of this equation is artistically emotional almost, when we would think rather that from outside seen as it is, that it would be more rational, since it's about rational numbers, not about emotional, which by essence should be not rational, but you can find rational in emotion and emotional in rational, and possibly that's what connects us to these works of art that take dimensions that are way bigger than only the ingredients of theirs, between the cook, the painter, the musician, the teacher, the artist, or the craftsman. At all levels we have to know how to build a good piano so we can sound with a lengthier sound, and then how to play the legato on it as a performer, because we heard the singing that we want to evoke on the piano, through the piano, by the instrument, through the instrument, and bring to others what either they don't know to expect, either to discover and say, oh, I love this Schubert sonata by this performer, as if by others it would be bad. But the piece by itself exists independently of the interpretation. So if you develop a taste for a certain interpretation, then you search for it. It's exactly like the taste buds. And so the taste buds can be developed in a way that you prefer more this or that in the ingredient, and you say, oh, it lacks this, it lacks that. But in order to be so discerning in your tasting, if you are a specialist of it, like let's say chef or a teacher chef, a cook, then the conductor in the orchestra, in a way, it's a little bit of that. It's like the general strategically organizing the troops and calculating how the balances will go. Like, this group will take the hill and this group will go through the woods and will have 10% loss, and they coldly calculate their losses as if there's no individual mothers behind each of these soldiers. Of course they are. But just to say that it's not as dramatic when you play music. Thankfully, nobody dies if you make the wrong dynamic change. Or at least if you think that you have to make a transition into a tempo that comes from another tempo with a different meter, which is not the same as the theme, and you have to think about remembering the first and transitioning to the second and presenting the third, and all that has to merge in a natural way, as if you just speak as a natural prose spoken and not only like learned lines in a theater play or rhymes in a poem that has chosen words that can all of a sudden highlight other thoughts by the choice of the word more than the meaning of the word, but combined of the choice and the meaning, which is what happens very often with the mother tongue. The sounds they putting in your mouth as a baby, and then you add meaning to them, and then sub-meanings to them, and then it becomes culture, then it becomes a language, then you read and calculate and think and dream in that language. Even if you learn other languages, it will be your mother tongue, and you'll do your table of multiplication mnemonic memorized in a way by the sounds of the words in your native language. And it will never be as natural other than to translate it to yourself, like you do it for foreign currency to see how much roughly it will cost compared to if you use the currency at home to realize if it's expensive or not. And if you don't know how to read in the clefs, if you don't know how to discover a piece on a score, because the reading of it takes a knowledge that you don't have, a computer, a synthesizer, a good teacher, possibly many years of learning can help you to do that. Or then you just push a button and you listen to the recording, and you don't have to go through the whole system of learning how to cook in order to eat. You just enjoy the other cooked foods by others for you. And so then you can start be choosy and say, what, I prefer this type of cuisine to this, I prefer this style to this, I prefer to play Beethoven than Chopin, but if I play Chopin, I like it without almost so much rubato. I was going to say it's almost like a sauce. I like it, but not so salty, but I like it, but a little more creamy. But then it won't go well together with this wine, which you combine with that cheese. And then if you're a gourmet, you know how to organize it so that it's a symphony of the palate, of the mouth, of the taste buds. And it can be a symphony of the ears. But the ears also communicate to all our senses through the emotion, through the eyes, through the ears, through everything. We can close our eyes or open our ears and all that. Of course, performing on the piano is also essentially an industry by itself, just to play, that we don't hear as much what we produce as much as what our fingertips feel, the cushions, and then the resonance that you obtain from them. And so it becomes a dialogue between my incentive to the sound production and the sound I receive in return, either the instrument, either the acoustic, either the room where I am, enhance it or don't. And then I can hear certain things more than others. I can compare it to instruments like the harp with that resonance, but the piano with the more pedal, the harpsichord but with more articulation, the fortepiano with the early dynamic changes but not as extreme as in the later modern piano that can enhance them to the point to which it can scream or whisper in a almost same note. And enhance this emotional expressions that are really to do with psychology and the way we are built as a humans, reacting to light and day and night, and shocked by the lack of the one or the quick change of the other. And imagine how our generations before lived in situations where they lived really with the sky in terms of light, at night none, and in the day all. And not artificial light all night long, and no screens to watch that make our eyes tired. But then they had cataracts differently at different time. In Bach had cataract, Beethoven was deaf, Schumann was in very troublesome mental trouble, poor man. I mean, all these different human lives pathologies didn't stop them from being who they became. Renoir painted with arthritis end of his life. They had to band tape the brush on his hand so he can still hold it, because he couldn't by himself, but still painted. As if the humans have to express themselves, sometimes with their ugly attitudes, most of the time with their refined ways, but because of the confrontational, competitive world, somehow everybody becomes more or less animalistic, back to the full circle of the beginning of times. And sometimes the intellectual awareness, knowledge that you accumulate as a sandwich when you take the privilege to study more, which at some point becomes an infinite ocean that you feel you're spoon-feeding yourself with, and it feels like there is no end at view for you, and you give up. That happens very often, except perhaps philosophers, researchers, who accept it as a given at the get-go, that I will never know all and I'll never understand all, and I'll try just to advance that little bit, that field that I'm interested in, and then somebody else will go on from there, as some others did before me, even if some brought us to dead ends and others brought us back to another way to find the continuous line of the development of this or that genetically or anything. I think it's a fascinating situation to accept our finitude as humans dealing with things that are in fact without end. They were here before us, like the music scores that were published or printed or handwritten originally, obviously, and at some point invented before they didn't exist, which sometimes with masterpieces seems to us almost unthinkable. How come it existed before that? But it didn't, and then at some point it comes up to exist. It becomes essential to the music community, so to say. Then it's translated, transmitted, taught, improvised, rather interpretation added to improvisation becomes published, and then it's recorded, and sometimes it's even having several publications who compete in being the most authentic among themselves, since they want you as a musician to buy their edition to be authentically closer to the musical will of the composer according to the availability of the original materials, not always, more than, well, less than more. And so all this freezes the knowledge at levels where by the time you develop them by yourself, and you're only a human, so you forget some, you add others, the layers get a little bit mixed. It's becoming like a construction of a tower that holds barely until perhaps it even wobbles on its roots, because you realize by now I should have known how to make the roots of the knowledge of it, but I somehow bypassed it because my fingers allowed me, and then I didn't have to learn it. I guessed it, I didn't need to know it, but now I need to understand better in order to go further up. So I have to deconstruct, to rebuild, to go further up, because my first two floors were hastily built. Often too early learned music in childhood doesn't have the same intellectual understanding, obviously, of the philosophic meaning of things. So you learn, you grow, you read, you life itself enriches you, and you become a human being with awareness, and and therefore tolerance for the others, and understanding, regardless of the individual character of people who sometimes are brash or sometimes just decide to be arrogant with the others because they're now and here and they have to impose themselves, and others are more reserved and more holding back and understanding that they're not going to bring themselves in the front row of imposing themselves within the same score that already existed from before and will exist after us, because generations after will learn it, study it, wonder how to play it, as well as those who did before. So who are we during the time what we are in front of it, between the person who discovers it or the teacher who helps them understanding and perform it, therefore brings them to quicker fruition than just going through their own experimenting with it. Between their understanding and the piece itself, the musical meaning of it, and the technical aspects that bring you to be able to play it. So that you have to know what it means in order to know how to mean it, and in order to prepare the means of it, for it. And that helps a lot with a teacher. If not, you have to just do imitation. You listen to others and you try to do it, just like children do when they're babies for their mother tongue. They respond by imitation, only by ear. So at this very first intuitive level, you add this knowledgeable level, then you this experience level, and all these layers of knowledge refine the understanding and in a way make it more vulnerable, because all of a sudden the complexity of it becomes more evident. And when you put it back to the first place for which you do music, let's say as a musician, you say, okay, I would have liked to know more, but now I know more than I wanted to, in a way, because one thing leads to another. You learn harmony, contrapoint, fugue, solfège, harmony, performance technique, pedaling, organization, and you understand misunderstand, perhaps re-understand, question the interpretation, what is the tempo, how it's supposed to be understood, where you take it from, how do you read a page, and understand what it means other than just the signs that are on it, and what is in between the lines, what is hinted, what is in the innuendos of things, and how much of them should be brought in and how much should be held back. Then you wonder if at the end of it, as a teacher, you bring to a student too much, and at which point of all that knowledge. Because you think as a human being, I want to be positive, I want to be helpful. I don't want to be, in a way, by giving too much information about, let's say, the layering of a complex texture for a pianist. I don't want to bring the student to a point where the student can either reject it, either say, I'm not going to be able to. And then discourage by over informing. But if you don't inform, you feel like you're not respecting the student who trusts you to bring them to this level to which they aspire to. They don't vaguely, but perhaps vaguely know how it's supposed to get there, but they trust you bring them there. And on the process, they might drop some things, they might forget some things, they might make their own mind and go another direction. So you don't want to only as a teacher impose, you want to also propose, suggest, be careful, and at the same time be stern and expecting about discipline, practice, repetitivity, the sense of self-betterment in the student that goes through a lot of lonely hours of practicing without seeing the results happen right away. And this lack of visibility in the results can also bring discouragement. So I, as a young teacher when I was, thought I'll just play and translate to them all my passion for the piece. That is not enough. Or then, if I'm only going to reveal to them the complexity of a given texture just from the page of the few bars that they're playing, to the point to which they have to put it back together to play it once they are aware of it, and this awareness makes them unable to put it back together, because in a way ignorance was bliss, because some things just fit together. The brain searches for the horizontality, not but for the verticality, how the two hands will match together, before to imagine how the two hands will share the voices that have to be heard and thought and understood and sung layered by layer. You have to do a little of both all the time. This and that, and together, but like this, but also this and this. And not only that and only this, which is more tempting because you feel like there will never be enough time, since you don't teach piano on an isolated island where the student has nothing else to do than to practice 10 hours a day the piano and then go to sleep and start the next day. I mean, this is, at that point it becomes almost like a farm. It's not music. You just feed an animal to sell in order to make to sell the meat to be consumed. That is not the same in a trivial way, of course. That's perhaps a very too trivial comparison or analogy. But I rather think that you want to grow this awareness in the student through your teaching, that whatever the textural complexity of the score, it has to remain a melody that is enhanced by the beauties of these decorative parts. And if all the parts are equally meaningful, then be it. They have to be all meaningful, perhaps colliding, perhaps overriding each other, perhaps canceling each other, perhaps being in a way where it sounds like chaos, musically speaking. But bringing the choices of what to bring, what to hold, what to organize in a way that you bring a transition to bring to a next stage, which is thematically a new material. So you think motivic, then you organize a statement and you become a sort of educated narrator of the piece rather than just a recitant of a holy text that cannot be moved by a iota. Because even if you decide that I'm going to move this punctuation here, all of a sudden I change the meaning of the sentence, then you're afraid you're going to betray the piece. And then you start having this stage fright about, oh my God, I'm going to disappoint my parents who believed in me, my teacher, the piece that I love so much, mostly the composer, who anyway is dead most of the time. But anyway, I feel like I belong to a certain tradition when I play it, because I want to play it like I've heard it either by others play that I admired, or perhaps I wanted always to play it in order to play it the way I never heard it by others, because I grew up to develop a taste for it through this and that influence of this and that, if not teacher, performer, perhaps recording or just concert going experience, and all of a sudden you have a revelation that this piece is, I want to play it one day. Even if you realize you have to have the technique to do so. So by the time you climb and you're ready to play it, you want then to think, so what am I doing now that I can? And you realize that to manage it, it looked easier from outside, but now that I'm on top of it, the management of it seems to be very difficult, because I feel like I have to, it's like a country management. I have to make sure I don't raise the taxes, but I develop the economy, but I make sure people are happy, and then I bring this and that, and the economy of the export and import, and it's very, and a lot, everything is in my thinking process as a teacher is very much full of analogies, as you noticed. I always think in analogies, perhaps not enough in abstract. That was one of my main troubles when I was a young child, because I guess my ear guided me so much that I had problems not hearing the music, even unplayed, meaning hearing it directly from the score to the ear without have to go through the interpretation of the playing of it. My teacher made me write from memory Bach Prelude and Fugues before I play them weekly, and layered as well, not bunched on two staffs for pianists, usually with up and down stems when you have more than two voices. And in fact, Bach's is at least 4, 3 most often, sometimes 5 in the well-tempered clavier. And so instead of amalgamating them right away and eating them, chewing them, playing them in chordal crunches, I knew how to sing one, play another, and cross hands and the other. And I lived with the fugue more than I could play it. I heard it, I solfeged it, I sung it to myself, or in a solfege style where you just say the names of the notes, do, re, mi, fa, sol, but you don't sing the pitches because of voice and mutation, or not mutation in this case, for my voice remained high-pitched. But I absorbed a lot of these elements of music very early because my teacher exposed me to them. She was 87, I was 7, and she decided there is not one day to spare to give me all the thirst for which I am thirsty. And so she didn't decide, okay, he'll learn about this style at 15 and this style at 20, and then he'll develop the knowledge about the later works of Beethoven, which require maturity. True. And I played things of mature composers with my immaturity because I was a pianist who could play early enough because my ear guided me, my eyes completed it, and my understanding also as a composer, because I always needed to go beyond the piece that I started, even when I was 5. I want to continue this piece. I'm sad it finished with a 2 bars line at the end, even if it's one line, a piano book beginner's piece as it was. So it wasn't like I wanted to compose because I want to be a composer as a posture or anything. It was more like I want this to continue. I don't like it to end. It's like this film is too good. I don't want it to be finished. So I'm going to imagine the rest of the story or imaginary continuation. People do that all the time in their fantasies, in their systems of daydreaming, in their organization of their inner lives. They don't have to say it to the others. But when you compose and you set it on paper in music, then it becomes playable by others. Then they take your ideas, becomes theirs. And then it's no more yours as much as theirs. And their interpretation doesn't have to be yours the way you imagined it when you conceived it in the first place, because after all your child grows and becomes the parent themselves, and there's no more just your child. So in a way the piece doesn't stay always your composition. It becomes the child of another performer, and even if it's not fully recomposed, it's interpretation. And so when I play as an interpretation, I don't think I'm recomposing it. That I don't confuse. And as a teacher I make sure, because I want them to respect the score, also because I want them to be accepted by the juries of the professionals, because that's what it is. We are there in the professional world of music around people who really know about music and know specifically about music and know which edition says what for which detailed, and where is a G sharp in this edition and is not in the other, and which is right or which is wrong, or which is newly discovered to be in fact what it was suggested to be because they found some manuscript here and there, and so on and so forth. So this kind of musical musicology, you can call it, or perhaps it's like everything. The curiosity brings you to search things that you didn't think you might. And perhaps everybody is an archaeologist in a way. And as archaeology in music is perhaps musicology becoming some kind of scholar. But then while you perform, you're in the real time. You're not in the time away, like you compose but you don't perform. You write an article about the sonata but you don't play it. You can describe it. You can write even a beautiful speech to deliver in a conference, which describes the piece, what it means when you hear it. But when you hear it is what you hear it. It's in front of the painting and you're next to an art specialist, then all of a sudden they tell you things and you look at the painting and you go, wow, I didn't know that is in there. But it is in there. And the fact that I'm aware of it, does it make me still love it the same way? Or do I try to say, perhaps I should forget all this knowledge? Mademoiselle Boulanger, who taught me from age 7 to 17 when she died between 87 and at 97, she told me something very striking, and to me then at least, as a teenager student of hers, even if it was for almost 10 years daily, intensely, as if last day, it was every day the last, because of her age. well, she told me, I think now you should start to forget everything I taught you if you want to go on in music. And I was thinking, I accumulated all this knowledge because I thought I was taught this is the politically correct thing to say in a way, or it is the whole purpose of these efforts for all these years is to accumulate knowledge that you don't have in the beginning. If not, you just like it for liking it, like I did, like all of us do. Oh, I love this piece. I don't know why. I don't care why, perhaps, ultimately, after all, if I want to be arrogant. But not. I just like it and I don't want to know about it. I'm not going to like it more because it's explained to me or because there are alternate explanations and people don't agree among the explanations and so on and so forth. No, she said, you should forget. And I was thinking at the time, this is not possible. It's like almost like as if it's an incredible sand castle that is erased by the wave. So what's left? In French, they say la culture, c'est tout ce qui reste quand on a tout oublié. That means culture is everything that is left once you forgot everything. Well, it's a rough translation. But the point is that it has to become you. You're not polite because your mom says, say thank you to the lady for giving you a cookie. Now I'm a child, I'm deserving it, I'm the eighth wonder of the world. No, they don't think so. He says thank you by developing a sincere sense of humility and gratitude. And the gratitude is most important, more than the humility. Well, both actually, I think, on both ends. But then it becomes a second nature and somebody gives you something and whatever it is, a smile, attention, a tool, you say thank you, but you mean it. Not just politely in the political correctness of words that your parent tell you, say to the lady thank you, and you go thank you, but you don't know why you're saying it. You just say because you're told to do so. And it's fine, because you have to learn the rules of good behaving. That's what it is, to be civically well trained, so you become polite. But once you forget all what you've learned, it meant by my teacher is that in politeness you remain polite for the purpose of it, even if you were shaped into it and not naturally so from the get-go of your existence. So that you become naturally kind, naturally sharing, naturally grateful, naturally grateful for everything, smallest or great, that is given or offered or sold to you, whatever transaction, but you accept it as a gift of life and you thank those who gave it to you because it becomes part of you. And then you travel with it, like you travel with a music piece, you change your interpretation through life. It is still the same piece, which means perhaps something else to somebody else and many things to many other people else. Even if it's the same famous piece of music or the same theater play or same film and people see it, understand it, are moved differently by it. But you still remain the vehicle of this piece that you received, and to this gift that with that gift combined merge into what is your gift to others. And it becomes your interpretation, that becomes your teaching belief, and then you translate it through your performance or your words to the students who will perceive it with their own capacity of absorbing, perhaps not much, perhaps more, perhaps less, perhaps take it and transform it into their own after to the next generation. And this way, the essence will be transmitted more so than just the fashionable shape of the moment. If it's fashionable to play very much rubato in the 50s, it's perhaps less fashionable in the 80s. If you had editions published by famous pianists as editors, or text with more about editors who are in fact musicologists or not performers themselves, they have a more distantiated point of view from the piece itself that they present you in an edition that you trust, becoming your medium with the dead composer's thought. Of course, you have living teachers to make sure to tell you what they think it is. I think this fingering might fit you better because of your hand compared to what the composer wanted, even if the publisher said this fingering fits better because that phrasing. And then you enter in these intricacies which are beautiful in a way. I mean, it can, and you can get lost in the detail. the plethora of details can make you lost. And you can say, well, then if it means so many different things to each, what does it mean to me? Does it matter? No, it doesn't. Then I had to give it up. There is no universal truth, and thankfully so, even if some people try to impose on the others theirs as such, but is not. But nothing is all relative either. There are some situations where you have to accept, even if you don't like this, that it's supposed to be the way to reach that level of that stage to the next stage. And then you trust your teacher to bring you there, then perhaps another teacher to bring you further or differently. And then at some point you teach yourself. And you learn more about from a bird in the street about something than a whole conference about this bird anatomically, of course. That is a bit another of those analogies of mine that come to mind constantly. But they're evocative in my mind at least, and I try to share that with you, of how fragile we are and how essential it is to respect and nurture while you teach, by giving this awareness. And this growing of awareness becomes your consciousness. As Mlle. Boulanger said one day, the dissonances of yesterday are the consonances of tomorrow. So perhaps that's what it is. The awareness of the one becomes the concern of the next generation, who will then become the assessment of the one after. And people will say, oh, they used to play this way, but nowadays we don't do that. Now we understand it better. We're better informed or more inspired, or now we have sources that tell us this and that. And you can still like it even wrongly performed in the supposedly not right interpretational understanding, but it sounds so good, and perhaps it attracted you to the piece because of that wrong understanding, or not willfully, but perhaps wishingly, but perhaps just misunderstood. But all of a sudden you liked it because of it. And sometimes greatest discoveries in science happen by mistake. Like I was searching for this medical disease medicine in this lab, and all of a sudden by a dosage of this I ended up finding something that has properties for something I didn't search for, but that can help another pathology. So we have to remain very humble when we translate knowledge from one person to another, or from one person to a group, which is also another level of complexities and lost information in the way, and how you broadcast, spray your knowledge. And it's not just knowledge, it's also coated in humanity, coated in psychology, coated in emotion, but also in rational. And the rational emotion is going to be one of the most difficult things to combine, right? Just being human and serving humans while giving them knowledge. Thank you.